Hi, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the Cardano Podcast. I'm Ryan Morrison, your host, and today I'll be talking about Credmark. I sat down with Niel, who is leading this project. You can find it in Fund 3 in Project Catalyst. And we discussed all about Credmark, and we talked in depth about it. And he also shared with us some interesting insights, like why did he choose Catalyst as a way to fund this project? Why is he looking also into Cardano and much more? Before we jump into the interview, if you want to support this Cardano podcast, you can now support us you can support our proposal in Idea Skill in Project Catalyst. You just have to go to Project Catalyst and then look in Fund 4 in the campaign Catalyst Value Onboarding, and then you'll be able to find the Cardano podcast. So we are applying there to get funded to continue with the series of interviews with the teams behind each of the projects and keep on bringing value this way to the Cardano community. So if you want to support us, just go to IdeaScale to cardano.ideascale.com, or you can just go to cardanopodcast.com and you'll find a way from there. You can find a link that will bring you to the proposal directly. All right, let's now start with the interview with Niel from Credmark. Hi guys, so as promised, I'm here with Niel from Credmark, and we're going to talk about the project that you guys have seen on Catalyst on Idea Skill. So hi, Niel, and welcome to the Cardano podcast.
Hello. It's great to be here.
Thanks for taking the time to discuss about credit and on the blockchain. So let's start with a short intro of yourself, and then we jump into the project itself.
Okay. My name is Niel Zumwalt. I am the CTO, or now the CEO of Credmark. We described ourselves as the Crypto Credit Bureau, and we have recently moved into making that a little more general by describing ourselves as decentralized risk modeling. So we are taking some of the traditional risk modeling metrics from the traditional finance and applying them to crypto loans in order to help these platforms develop a more diverse product offering.
Cool, interesting. Yeah, we'll go much more in depth on that. Maybe also what's interesting, I think, in your case is that you have been working on Ethereum already, and of course, so far for the DeFi space, Ethereum is the platform where everything has developed so far. So maybe we can discuss that, and how do you came across also Cardano as another option, and when you started also on posting the project on Idea Scale, and how do you came across from Ethereum to Cardano?
Yeah, so we went through an accelerator program in late 2019 called T-Lab, and one of D-Lab's LPs was Emergo. So that was really my first introduction to Cardano, because Emergo, it's unclear to me where the lines between Emergo and IOHK are explicitly, but I developed a relationship with some of their tech stack guys and kind of got an insight into what Cardano was able to do and what sort of the roadmap looked like as they tried to introduce proof of stake into their offering, and they have done that pretty successfully. The one thing that we've really been waiting for, and the reason that we haven't gone as deep into that project yet, is because we're sort of we're almost a layer 3 solution on top of these layer 2 solution DeFi platforms, which I see potentially coming to Cardano pretty quickly here, especially with things like Liquid coming out. So I've developed a relationship with the Liquid guys and saying, how can we take some of this risk modeling work that we've already done for these DeFi platforms and crypto lenders and apply them to the upcoming DeFi projects so that the offerings that they have are potentially as competitive or more competitive than some of the stuff that's going on DeFi on the Ethereum chain currently.
Interesting. Now that you mentioned Liquid, for all the listeners of the podcast, we also did an interview with a DC from Liquid Finance, so you can also hear it here in the Cardano podcast. Maybe now let's go and jump more into the project itself. And what was the main problem that you saw, and then how are you trying to solve it with Credmark?
So our personal, corporate history sort of was a journey of us finding our own problems and then discovering that everyone else had these same problems. So our very first kind of venture into DeFi was we built sort of a prototype peer-to-peer lending space and realized that there's no credit data about any of the counterparties that you're talking to. And so as we're trying to find a data provider who can give us some of that work, we're like, okay, we have to generate this data ourselves. We have to be able to generate our own risk models and start consuming, on-chain data via transaction history, via previous state, and via the current context of the chain. Mm-hmm. And so we said, okay, the world's not ready for this peer-to-peer lending thing. This was like summer of 2018. Right. Let's provide the credit data so that we can support people who can. Because the one thing that we realized pretty quickly is that if we became a lender in any context, then we would be undermining our own product. Because you don't want people who are the credit bureau to have their own lending products. It was obviously a pretty
would biased.
Yeah. And so we said, okay, this comes with a lot of really interesting problems because when you are if you look at the history of credit bureaus in the United States, and I'm from the United States, so that's where I get most of my information, cultural information. It was this interesting sort of amalgamation of banks starting to share their lending informations about their customers with each other in sort of like informal ways that were pretty regional. And then slowly that got incorporated into these like larger conglomerations that became the credit bureaus that were ingesting scores from FICO that were heavily regulated. So in the TradFi space, basically it's as far as the lender's perspective is concerned, it's all stick of the stick and the carrot. It's all trying to avoid punitive action from regulating bodies. Mm-hmm. So the really interesting problem for us to solve at that point was how do we get this cooperation happening, and how do we develop that kind of trust so that this data can come together and be consumed by everyone and can be shared by everyone, and we can start developing some real insights about this in a world that is anonymous, in a world that is largely permissionless. There are the private lenders out there that don't share their data with the world, but mm-hmm. A DeFi lender, obviously you can see everything that happened. And so we don't, there's like this whole treasure trove of permissionless data out there with which that we could start building these risk models. And then there was this whole other side of the coin that was like these private lenders. And so we spent kind of 2 years kind of bridging that gap and making a crypto credit score, which we modeled after FICO. We took all of their risk parameters and kind of recreated them with crypto analogs. And now we're moving into a space where it's pretty clear that the same concerns don't necessarily apply between FICO and crypto. So we are looking at breaking this into its constituent parts. to say, okay, in order to make this model, what we had to take into account was collateral that was being held, LTVs that people were being held, that's loan to value. So that's how much collateral versus how much loan you have. And things like, do you add more collateral in a market down event? Is your position too small to even be liquidated? Is another good question. So we've built all these tools to help figure out these individual component parts. And we said to ourselves, okay, we need to have these validated by the community now, and we need to allow people to access each of these component parts of this score in order to allow for kind of the ecological diversity that's existing in DeFi. And I think that our application to the Cardano idea scale thing was really about how do we incorporate that Cardano stuff so that they can use some of this wisdom from the 3-ish years of experimentation that we've already had on DeFi, and sort of avoid some of the pitfalls, and then leverage some of the unique things about Cardano that potentially allow for these products to be more robust.
Got it.
I'm sorry, that was really long-winded. I totally forgot what the initial question was.
No, yeah, you answered. It's fine. I was thinking of also a big part of blockchain is the privacy, but of course there's a trade-off with privacy, and this is something else I discussed the other day with DC from Liquid as well, that there is also a big argument in favor also of showing some data, so you can personalize and specifically for cases for lending, borrowing. How do you see that in Credmark? How much data do you guys will be showing from the lenders or the borrowers on the platform, and what do you think it's important to show from our privacy?
So one of the kind of aha moments that we had in our development was that in the traditional world, you score people and it sticks with them as long as they are within the boundaries of a country, right, of a certain jurisdiction. My borrowing history is not going to translate to Canada, or well, it might even in Canada, I'm not sure. But it's not gonna translate to another country. But this crypto thing is global. Yeah. So one of the interesting things that we decided we were going to do is that instead of focusing on identity, we were going to focus on the address itself. And it's a unique problem because addresses are so low overhead to generate that people use lots and lots of them. But there's a lot of cases where you can kind of stitch that story together of different people who fall into these kind of different tranches, and potentially what addresses are held by the same underlying entity, be that an institution or an individual. But in the world of crypto, an institution is an individual. They're treated exactly the same way. They have the same, in like a purely algorithmic world, when an address can represent either, then the rule set is consistent across those different entities. So that presented sort of an interesting problem for us, where it was where we wanted to treat those things the same. Part of our thinking about this is that these lending platforms, whatever's borrowing or lending on the other side of this could be an individual, it could be an institution, it could even be something that is like a non-human entity. So maybe this is a shipping container, that needs to borrow money in order to get shipped somewhere, then that shipping container needs to have a credit score. So we can't really treat identity in the same way that you would normally treat identity. So we said the atomic unit is the address, And then we do some, predictive work to cluster the addresses together to try and get like a bigger picture, but that's really for the sake of having more data to score.
Yeah.
And yeah. And the enforcement mechanism would just be that this address wants to preserve its credit.
And is that something that so then that individual would have to provide his or her different addresses or
Yeah,
how would that work?
So the piece that we're really focused on for the idea scale thing is sort of our layer 2 solution, which is a web app where people can go in and see these scores, because right now they're sitting behind an API. So part of the benefit of that is if we have more data to be, consuming, then we have a more complete picture and you can increase your credit score. So the users will come in, they'll attest to their Ethereum addresses that have used DeFi before, maybe even some that haven't. We do take into account kind of like token holdings, and can attest to a few other wallets. And so we're going to include Cardano in that list of other wallets. At that point, we say, okay, you have like this much value, X amount of it is leverage, X amount of it is borrowed. In the case of a market downturn, you would be liquidated here, here, and here. And we don't think you'd be able to move the cash around to protect these assets because it doesn't exist in any of these wallets that you've told us about to begin with. So that could lower your score. But generally adding more addresses, in most cases, it raises your credit score. So we're hoping that people
there's an incentive for doing it. Yeah,
we'll want completeness on that. And so that's a bold assumption. But I think that the value add on the other side of it, once these DeFi platforms are consuming our models, is pretty substantial, and you're going to want a complete list. Also, I think that like as mainstream adoption happens, we'll be pulling in people who are not as. I think that the future users of DeFi are less concerned with privacy than the current users of DeFi.
Yeah.
So.
True. And that's a good point. Also going back to the incentives. There's, as you mentioned, there's an incentive of providing as much data as possible, because then you have a higher score, meaning also better terms for you as a borrower. Then we go again to the financial aspect of things. That it's the real incentive behind. Also for people to provide that data. Going back to the same privacy and trade-off, that the more you give, then the higher your score, and so on. All right. I think like for all the listeners of the podcast, if you want to know more about Credmark, I'll leave a link in the description of the YouTube video. For if you're listening to this on any podcast platform, you can just go to cardano.ideascale.com and just search for Credmark in the Fund 3. I think you were right.
Yep. I think we may pop into Fund 4 as well, but we'll see.
Cool. So if you just go to cardano.ideascale, you'll be able to look much more in detail about Credmark. I think it's also interesting to see the feedback from people. So you can also look at that. Maybe we can also discuss a bit that part also of how was your experience with Catalyst, and then the feedback that you got, if it helped you enrich the project, or what things would you change for coming funds as well.
Okay. So the fund is really interesting, because it's sort of like, I mean, we've pitched to investors 100 times, and this is very like the idea scale format allows you to sort of like anticipate those questions and answer them preemptively. And then feedback is our feedback has been so mixed. It's really interesting to listen to people who think I think people have had a very diverse set of experiences when it comes to credit scoring. So people some people think it's like very obvious that it needs to exist, and other people I think have a much more negative view of that product, and they don't necessarily
based on
want
their own history.
They don't want it to exist in the crypto space for any number of reasons, which is again part of why we're at the end of the day, from a lender's perspective, the thing that the parts of their company that generally where they can really change their bottom line is with their underwriting procedures and with their risk modeling, and that's really like one of the primary drivers of any lending business, any bank, any lending business. So it's interesting, but I don't think the consumers of it really like credit scoring. So it's been very interesting to get a wide array of feedback from that. But it's definitely, I don't think I've seen anything that's that's like very universal about our project. And that's kind of been the experience the whole time, is that some people think it's impossible. Some people think that credit scoring is a anti-privacy mechanism, although we address those questions pretty head on. So it's interesting to get just inundated with lots and lots of feedback. And then there's a part where they've got all of the, it's unclear to me as to who was leaving this feedback, but they gave just a huge Google document full of feedback kind of all at once towards the end. And I think it's the people who are like running it, like everybody comes in and
they do a summary of the
project. Sure. Yeah, but it's funny to have two people saying the exact opposite things in the same comment. And but it's been wild. It's been wild to get that. And this is kind of the first time that we're venturing into an alt chain. So it's taking into consideration sort of the I think it's like a different level of, it's a different type of like loyalty to a smaller chain, where the people who are judging the projects that are coming into this, there's huge upside for the success of these projects, and as compared to Ethereum, where these things like pop on, and if no one cares, and it goes away, and the investors are like, well, I lost my money, but ETH went up 55%, so I don't really care. Or I mean, they probably care, but you get my point. And on the Cardano space, it's a lot more. It's interesting to have the sort of appropriate skepticism and feedback loop coming from people who have a serious stake, sort of generically, in the success of your project. So I think it's like a different relationship to us, than I've worked with in the past.
That's, I think, what makes such an interesting exercise, Catalyst as a project. That it gets all the people that are involved, and then as you said, they're all holders of ADAs, and that's what allows them to vote, which makes it so interesting. And then hopefully that brings also good and in-depth feedback for all the projects that go to Catalyst. That's what everybody's trying to push for. Like, if you're gonna leave a comment or a feedback, just it doesn't help to say I don't like it or I like it. What helps is to give the exact reason why you do or why you don't, and some even ideas that it could even enrich the project itself. Cool. I think we covered already a lot of the project. I don't know if there's anything else that we haven't discussed, Niel, that you would like to talk about or mention or ask anything to the community.
As far as I would encourage anyone listening who is not familiar with the Idea Scale program to go and check it out and look at all of the different proposals on there, because I think that's going to be, I think it's an interesting little primordial soup of where this is going to go. So if you're looking for trends and on like what's coming available. So before, the users of these platforms are all hanging out on Twitter and talking about using these platforms, but the builders of the platforms are the ones who are going to ahead of time. So if you're really looking for a preemptive look at what products are really going to be driving the strategies of, probably realistically 2022, this is a good way to get a grasp on like where things are going. And everybody talks about this Lego structure, right? Where this DeFi environment is built of the infrastructure, and then you've got like the data, and then people are building Legos, and then something like a DeFi project can be successful when it just sits on top of Compound and just changes the Compound interface in an interesting way for its users. Like that's all you really need to do at this point. So sort of like the consumers of these, the next layer of Legos, if you want to know what that looks like, you should go to these kinds of spaces and take a look, and develop opinions from those projects that are actually like pushing themselves forward.
Yeah, exactly.
So that would be my only encouragement. Even if you're not an ADA holder, even if you're an ETH maximalist and you only think it's going to be ETH, there are different there's like a different set of constraints on these different chains that I think are very, very promising in a lot of different ways, and sort of just change the calculus of how these things can be done. Right now, there's a huge effort in the ETH community to push data off chain. And I don't think those same sort of constraints apply in a proof of stake system. So I think that, the connection may be tenuous, but I think they're really, really going to shape the user experience of what these platforms are like.
Yeah, true. That's very true. All right. Thank you very much, Niel, for your time. To all the listeners, thank you as well. And we'll be later this week we'll have more interviews with other projects. And again, if you want to know more about Credmark, just go to cardano.ideascale.com. And I think, Niel, you have a website as well, right? It's
we got credmark.com.
Credmark.
Credmark.com.
Perfect. You heard it, guys. So then credmark.com, and then you can read much more about it. So thanks, Niel, and thank you, everyone. Cheers.
Yep. Thank you. Bye.
Perfect.